Talking about the biggest stories that matter to you the most. Breaking news, John Calipari is finalizing a 5-year deal to become the Arkansas Razorbacks' next head coach, covering college sports like no one else. The biggest guests in sports. We now welcome in Hall of Famer Jim Calhoun.
Such a pride I had, I came to connect.
The legend, Tim Tebow, joins us.
We'll run it back. I like it.
The legend, Herschel Walker. Welcome in, everybody. A little Sunday night edition, Aaron Torres Sports Podcast. I'm your host, Aaron Torres. Hope everybody's doing well. Hope everybody's having a great day. Hope everybody enjoyed the third of 3 top 25 matchups this weekend in college football. And I'll tell you this, if you listen to the Aaron Torres pod this week, I said time and time again, I said one of the great traditions in all of sports is the Sunday night Labor Day weekend game in college football. I don't know who puts the schedules together, but it feels like we always get great games. We got a thriller in Las Vegas on Sunday night as USC. How about the Trojans? Lincoln Riley back from the grave, baby. That is right. Lincoln Riley and the USC Trojans get a thrilling 27-20 win in Las Vegas. I'll be blunt. I was thinking about going to this game. Schedule did not allow me to do it, but it was an absolute thriller. We're going to break it down from all angles. We are going to discuss it. By the way, if you're listening on podcast, we will have a full week 1 recap after this. But if you're listening on YouTube, it is worth noting, by the way, that we are talking all things LSU USC. Before we get started, a couple quick things. One, make sure you're subscribed to the Aaron Torres Pod YouTube channel. New clips, new videos going up every single day. We went live on Sunday afternoon to break down all of week 1 in college football. There is no slowing down. We are full speed ahead. Appreciate everybody's support. Past 43,000 subscribers earlier in the weekend, so appreciate everybody again. Thinking we can get to 50,000 by the end of September with your support. Also, make sure that you are also subscribed on podcast, Apple, Spotify, etc. Again, thank everybody for everybody's support. Should mention, by the way, and I've mentioned it throughout the weekend, we do have a new presenting partner, Collie Puffs and ColliePuffs.com. Okay, so I'll be quick on this because you've heard about it all weekend, but the bottom line is, listen, I'm not a parent, but I know many of you are. Your parents, your grandparents, and the one thing you're trying to figure out is, what can I feed my children that's healthy, but also that they're going to want to eat and they're going to want to enjoy? Well, Collie Puffs is your answer. This is a family-owned business not far from where I live. And what's cool about them and their story, they're no different than you. They're no different than me. They were sitting around the house. The kids were always going for the unhealthy snacks, not eating well. And they said there has to be a better way. And so Joey at Collie Puffs straight up looked himself in the mirror and said, I need a better solution for my kids. He created them from scratch. They are the healthy alternative to your snack food aisle at the grocery store. Avocado oil, baked, not fried. But here's the crazy part. They're still delicious. They sent me a box about 2 weeks ago. They were completely finished by me, Mrs. T. Not going to lie, a few fell on the floor. The dog even loved them. So make sure that you check out Collie Puffs. Listen, again, you're trying to eat healthy. It's football season. We're all spending time on the couch. We're snacking, we're eating, but we need that healthy alternative that also tastes good. Collie Puffs and ColliePuffs.com is your answer. Oh, by the way, they're also available on Amazon. So as I said earlier in the day, if you're on Amazon searching for whatever, tires, if you're on Amazon searching for a new set of forks and knives, whatever it is, just search for Collie Puffs as well. You can find them there. Throw them in the cart. You will not regret it. Tell them Torres sent you. You will not be disappointed. With that said, it is a busy Sunday night. There is no more time to waste. The chat is already humming. So let's go ahead and get to the topic of the evening. And the topic of the evening, I will be blunt. We got ourselves an absolute thriller in Vegas Sunday night. USC, LSU, and as I said to lead the show, it is wild because these Sunday games, for whatever reason, always deliver here on the Sunday of Labor Day weekend. Don't know what it is, don't know why, don't understand, but this was a fun back and forth game. We know what happens. LSU kicks the field goal with about 147 or so left on the clock. USC gets the ball back. You think they are just going to go ahead and run out the clock. No. They drive the length of the field. Miller Moss throws a pass. There's the roughing the pass, whatever. Bottom line, they're on the goal line. Woody Marks punches it in. USC wins 27-20. And I'll say this, haven't tweeted it out yet, but that Undertaker gif where the guy rises up from the grave, that is who Lincoln Riley was on Sunday night. Because more than anything, when I think about college football, I don't think there's a single person, even Deion Sanders. Think about the people that have gotten the most scorn and hate in college football in the offseason. I think Lincoln Riley is numero uno, number one, and I don't think it's even close. Listen, I don't criticize other media members, but think about what Paul Feinbaum has said about this guy. He's irrelevant. He's no good. He's a glorified offensive coordinator. He's going to be replaced by Deion Sanders when he ends up getting fired. Listen, the guy isn't perfect. USC had a down year last year, and I understand the manner in which he left Oklahoma left a lot of people kind of scratching their heads. By the way, the manner in which he left Oklahoma when we all thought that he was a candidate for the LSU job, it doesn't change the fact the guy never forgot how to coach. And so when I look at this game, more than anything, I think it's an indictment of him. He's not terrible. He had a lot of learning to do. And I think he had a lot of humbling that came his way after last season. Listen, I'm not going to sit here and sugarcoat it. It wasn't perfect. He didn't have the best 2023 that any coach has ever had. But when you look at the situation he took over, I don't think the guy got enough credit for what he did in his first season, where USC went from 4-8 to 11-3 in the Pac-12 championship game. And never forget, if they win the Pac-12 championship game in the same building that they won on Sunday night, they were going to the college football playoff. They lose to USC, they lose to Tulane, and then last year, there's no sugarcoating it. It was an absolute debacle. But at the same time, when you look at this guy in this program, I thought last year was kind of a weird year. The schedule was backloaded. Caleb Williams, listen, he's an incredible talent, but do think he kind of started to whatever you want to call it. He kind of started to freelance. He kind of started to do his own thing. And I thought it kind of got out of control quick. But to his credit, I think there are two things that he has done over the last probably 10 months since the regular season ended that I think he absolutely deserves credit for. The first one, you already know what it is. Let's go ahead and talk about it. He hired Lynn, the defensive coordinator from UCLA. Crosstown rival. Listen, I think that was actually the move that probably sent Chip Kelly to Ohio State more than anything else. He loses his defensive coordinator to the crosstown rival, loses a couple players to the portal. Chip Kelly bounces. But D'Anton Lynn, never forget, last year UCLA went from, not a terrible defense to like top 10 in the country. So this guy comes to USC. And I understand that on Sunday night it wasn't perfect. But on Sunday night, they held LSU to 20 points and in general, about 400 yards of total offense. Now, that's not going to necessarily get it done in the bigger picture, but it doesn't change the fact this is what we talked about all offseason. USC doesn't need to be great defensively, okay? And this is what we've talked about over the last 3, 4, 5 weeks. They don't need to go from 117th in the country to 28th. They just got to go from like 117th to like 84th. And if you do that, you're going to win a lot of games. What you can't be is what you were last year, again, which we have talked about on this show time and time and time again. These were USC's final couple games last year. They lose to UCLA 38-20. They lose to Oregon 36-27. And let's be honest, it was rainy. It was cold. The game wasn't as close as the score would indicate. Gave up 52 to Washington. USC's final win of the season last year in the regular season was a 50-49 win over Cal. So you were awful last year. And you didn't have to go from awful to the best defense in the country. You just had to go from awful to not terrible, and the offense would take care of itself. And so when I look at Sunday night, what I see is a defense that is improved, a defense that, listen, they just needed to be a little bit better, and they were, and the offense would do the rest. I think the other thing that Lincoln Riley kind of deserves credit for, and this is one where maybe, just maybe, he kind of lucked into something. What do they say? Luck is where preparation meets opportunity. That's the case for Miller Moss, because if you go back to last November and December, when Caleb Williams leaves, you can go back and look it up. USC was in the portal for a quarterback. That is not disputable. They had Will Howard on campus visiting, okay? And so I bring it up because when Miller Moss goes to the Holiday Bowl, he throws for 6 touchdowns. And I think that's when the light bulb went off on top of Lincoln Riley's head, where he's like, you know what? I'm still pretty good at this play calling thing. I know what I'm doing. Miller Moss throws for 6 touchdowns in that game. And all of a sudden they say, you know what? Let's not spend $1 million on a quarterback in this NIL portal world. Let's save that money. Let's use those resources elsewhere. We can win with Miller Moss. And so if anybody deserves any type of credit, it's Miller Moss. And listen, I know Herb Street and Reese Davis talked about it during the game, but it's worth noting. This is a cool story. Miller Moss was at USC when Lincoln Riley got there. Lincoln Riley decides to bring in Caleb Williams. He doesn't leave. He stays, and he has the performance of a lifetime. Well, not performance of a lifetime, because he had 6 touchdowns in that Holiday Bowl, but 27 of 36, 378 yards, and 1 touchdown in this game. That is just an absurd stat line for a guy that stuck it out for 4 years. Remember, as a freshman, you know who he played behind was Jackson Dart, who's obviously now at Ole Miss. But he stayed. This is his 4th year. He could have left, and he was awesome on Sunday night. And he absolutely deserves all the credit in the world. And so, listen, I don't want to put the cart before the horse, but you start to look at USC. You start to look at the schedule that they will play. This team isn't as bad as I think a lot of people thought they were going to be. It was funny because, you talk to the casual versus the actual college football fan. I think there were a lot of actual college football fans that were like, USC might be sneaking up on some people. They might be a little bit better than we expect. And that's kind of exactly who they were. I don't know if I told this story on air, but 3 weeks ago, I was on vacation. Went with my wife and her family to her home country, Guatemala, whatever. Bring it up. We're in the airport at security. I happen to be wearing this guy right here, an LSU hat that I bought when I was in New Orleans for the 2022 Final Four. And I have somebody stop in their tracks, stare at me, and say, you guys are going to beat our brains in Vegas in a couple weeks. It was a USC fan, thought I was an LSU fan. But I just bring it up because I don't think most people that don't follow college football on a day-to-day basis really realize what USC was capable of. Didn't think they were as far off. And the one thing I will say, Lincoln Riley knows how to put together an offense. And when they needed plays, they got them. It is worth noting, by the way, I think they actually left a lot of points on the field, missed the field goal right before half. By the way, they have a touchdown call back because of, a penalty at one point. Early second half, they do have to kick a field goal, settle in the red zone for a touchdown. And so I look at what USC did. All of a sudden, I'll be honest, I don't think it's nearly as bad or nearly as dire at USC. Now, are they on that upper level? No, they're not there. They're not beating Georgia. They're not beating, I don't think, Bama. I don't think they're beating Ohio State. But listen, you look at the rest of the rest of the Big Ten, not Pac-12, the Big Ten. You look at the rest of the Big Ten. Look around. Oregon did not look great. They're not even on USC's schedule, it's worth noting. But look, Michigan. I watch Michigan a lot. Saturday night, Fresno State. I know Fresno State's a good group of 5 program, but Michigan does not look unbeatable this year. I don't think they know who their quarterback is. You go on and on down the list. Let's talk about it. I like Penn State. It's one game. Let's see what they look like. Wisconsin did not look good. As I mentioned, there's no Ohio State. There's no Oregon on the schedule. Washington is not very good this year. Jed Fish is going to get there, but I don't think he's there yet. So I just bring it up because everybody was throwing the flowers on Lincoln Riley's grave. I don't think this team is as bad as we thought. Tell you what, my computer's about to die, so we'll take a quick break. Producer Matt, run the commercial. We will come back and talk LSU because LSU, Brian Kelly, I like BK. This poor guy's got to stop scheduling such big out-of-conference games to start the season. Quick break. Be right back. Before we do, many of you ask me all the time, Torres, what can I do to help support the show? You give me hours and hours and hours of content every single week. What can I do to help you? Well, I'll tell you what. Do me a quick favor. Check out the Aaron Torres Media merchandise store for all of your team-specific shirts, hats, and more. All available at aarontorresonline.com/merchandise. A lot of you wondering, Torres, what can I get in that merch store? Well, first of all, we got our brand new Hope and Pope Kentucky basketball t-shirts. That's right. Mark Pope has arrived. He is here to save the day. Get your Hope and Pope t-shirts there. Also, Arkansas fans, the Big Pig Invasion is here. You can get your tees there. Basketball School Alabama shirts. Mora Hurley 2024 UConn shirts for your tailgates at Rentschler Field, your games at the XL Center or Gamble. And oh, by the way, your Mike effing Woodson gear for Indiana. If you love football, we got you covered too. We got more Dion shirts and hats than we even know what to do with. The freeze warning has hit the plains. Auburn fans, grab your freeze warning tees now. And of course, our new era, new rules shirt applies to Nebraska football and its incredible fan base. We have more coming for the fall, plenty in stock right now. So make sure to check out the Aaron Torres Media merch store at aarontorresonline.com/merchandise. And you can always hit me up with any questions. Aaron Torres Podcast Questions @gmail.com. All right, everybody. I am back. Gonna be back. So let's go ahead and get to the LSU perspective on things. By the way, speaking of perspective, a little bit of, we just think this is an SEC world. They're going to get 11 teams in the playoff, and that's obviously hyperbole. I know there's 5 automatic bids. I'm being sarcastic. But my buddy Garrett Carr, who used to do some writing for AaronTorresOnline.com, he brought up an interesting point. You know that the week 1, right now, the Big Ten went 17-1 in Big Ten, in games in this, obviously the teams in this conference. The only loss was Minnesota missed a field goal late. They would have beat North Carolina, but 17 wins for the Big Ten. Obviously the signature ones coming, Penn State beating West Virginia, and I guess Maryland beating UConn is obviously a huge one. There's no doubt about that. But USC taking care of business against LSU. From the LSU perspective, I'll be blunt. I'd love for there to be like an unbelievable takeaway for me for LSU. But I'll tell you this. LSU is a team. I don't want to say that I didn't understand the hype on them coming into the year. I didn't think they were. I don't think they're like one of the top 5 teams in the SEC. Like, now listen, they get Bama at home. They don't play Georgia. They get Ole Miss at home. That's a game that historically LSU has dominated in Baton Rouge. So it doesn't mean that they're a terrible team that's going to go 4-8 this year. But let's, to quote my old buddy JJ Redick, it's a math equation, F-Ed. And it's like, you look at this team. Last year's Heisman Trophy winner, Jaden Daniels, is on the sidelines. You lose 2 first-round wide receivers. Beyond that, and I thought the guys on the broadcast brought up an interesting point. Jaden Daniels was also a 1,000-yard rusher last year. Your defense was also as bad as USC's. So again, even if the defense improves, is the offense going to be better? Because USC's offense is going to be better, but I can see a world where Lincoln Riley has it operating at a really high level. I don't think you can assume that with LSU losing the offensive coordinator, Mike Denbrock, and then, of course, losing Jaden Daniels and the 2 wide receivers. In terms of this game, listen, my only real thought is a couple things. First of all, you see the stat at the bottom of the screen. This is one of the most shocking stats I think any college football fan could ever imagine. LSU, the school of Joe Burrow, the school of Les Miles, Nick Saban. What is the stat? The last 3 coaches to coach there have won a national championship. You go on down the list, all the great players who have played there, Glenn Dorsey. I mean, you could go on forever. LSU has now lost 5 straight season openers. That might be the most insane stat in college football, okay? So they lost in 2020. That was the COVID year off the Joe Burrow championship. They lost to Mississippi State. Sad story, of course, because that was Mike Leach's first game as an SEC coach. Rest in peace, Coach Leach. But they lose to them. 2021, a game not far from where I'm sitting right now. They lose at the Rose Bowl. That was Ed Orgeron's final season there. I remember having LSU fans text me while I was doing my radio show, walking out of the stadium, said, we cannot keep going on with this guy. Last 2 years, you lose to Florida State. First one in New Orleans, second one in Orlando a year ago. And then, of course, you lose in this game, and it was not pretty. So I think my number one takeaway for LSU, you got to stop scheduling so many good teams in the out of conference. I mean, listen, this is this is one where we criticize Lincoln Riley for trying to get out of this game. Brian Kelly, my man, I like Brian Kelly, but you got to talk to Scott Woodward. Can we get a Ball State on the schedule? Can we get a Louisiana Monroe on the schedule? Can we get a San Jose State on the schedule? What are we doing here, Brian Kelly? Anyway, in terms of this game, listen, I wasn't as enthused about LSU as a lot of people going into the season. Do think there are some positives, though. One, again, I know it's a weird thing to say in a game where both teams each had over 400 yards of total offense. That LSU defense did look improved to me. That LSU defense was improved. They did a couple times hold USC in the red zone. And so I do believe that they are better than a year ago. The issue with LSU, as we've talked about, is what are you going to do on offense? Because even if LSU, it's the opposite of USC. Even if LSU goes from 115th to 81st on defense, even if you improve like that on offense, are you going to stay as the number one offense in college football? Like I mentioned a minute ago, I can see a world where USC is still a top 10 offense. I'm not projecting it, but you give me Lincoln Riley, you give me that receiving core, Zachariah Branch, Lemon, Mekhi Lemon, Deuce Robinson, the tight end. I almost called him Deuce Vaughn. That's the 5'6" running back who got drafted by the Cowboys a few years ago. But you give me that offense, I can see a scenario where they're top 10 in the country. I don't see a scenario where LSU is anything close. Now, if you're looking for some positives, a couple things. Nussmeier looked really good. And this was a guy I was not quite sold on coming into the year. No, he had a couple good bowl games through the years, played well last year, but he's another one. Listen, let's take a minute and give him a little bit of credit, because I do think that respectfully, I actually think he was actually better than I was expecting a year ago. But I want to give him credit because he's another one. Could have transferred, came in, had a chance to win the starting job when Jaden Daniels got there 2 years ago. Ends up losing the starting job, easily could have left. And I do think if you're looking for some positives, thought he actually threw the ball really well. The final stats are not available online, unfortunately. I believe 29 of 38 was his final stat line. But I just bring it up because he looked a little bit better than I was expecting. Kyron Lacey obviously was awesome at the wide receiver position. Mason Taylor looks better as well. But I still think LSU, and I know it's not what LSU fans want to hear, I still think they're kind of a year or two away, because you look at this program. Last year's recruiting class was really good. I think it was the stat was like 10 of the top 11 players in Louisiana committed and signed with LSU. Next year's recruiting class, 2025, is unbelievable. Bryce Underwood, the number one quarterback in America, is committed to LSU. But I just don't think they're there yet. I just don't see that LSU freakish talent across the board that makes me sit there and say this is an unbeatable team that's going to the college football playoff, even as the third or fourth big SEC representative. You look at them on paper, I don't think they're better than Ole Miss. I don't think they're better than Georgia, certainly. Alabama, certainly. I don't think they're better than Tennessee. Now, to be clear, you look at the schedule, doesn't mean that they can't win games. Next four are all absolutely winnable. Nicholls at home, South Carolina on the road. South Carolina stinks. They finished the LA double dip with UCLA at home on the 21st of September in week 3, South Alabama, before you get into SEC play with Ole Miss at Arkansas, Texas A&M before a bye. And so I'm not as down on this team overall as possible, because you should be 4-1 going into Ole Miss. And in a stat that I keep throwing around, Ole Miss has not won in Baton Rouge since 2008. So don't just chalk that up as an automatic Ole Miss win and LSU stinks and whatever. But when I look at this team across the board, I just don't think they're as good as they have been in previous years. Not anti-Brian Kelly, still believe in him, still believe it's going to take some time. Listen, Ed Orgeron left a roster that had some really nice position groups in some spots. The wide receiver group was certainly incredible. Malik Neighbors, Brian Thomas, obviously the guys you saw tonight, Kyron Lacey, Keyshawn Boutte, who's in a little bit of trouble right now. You can Google that if you missed it. But they are just lacking in a lot of other places. Good news is that O-line looked really good. John Emery, I thought, was kind of a cool story. This was a guy that was a 5-star who played with Joe Burrow and played with, played on that 2019 national championship team, has gotten in all sorts of trouble off the field. But to his credit, he has come back and he's actually playing very well. And he was one of the few guys that I thought stepped up and played really well tonight. So for LSU, I just got to call a spade a spade. I think they're good. I think on paper, I remember the day the SEC poll came out, the day after SEC Media Days, I was on radio with my buddy Phil Elson in Arkansas. He said, who's the team that stands out? I think LSU was picked to finish 5th. I said, that feels a little too high. And that's exactly what happened. All right, tell you what, producer Matt, before we get out of here, let's get to a couple quick questions. I see one guy saying getting out of this crappy channel. So that's a great start. What kind of questions do we have here on a Sunday night? Appreciate your support. Tell me if I am wrong thinking this looks like Lincoln Riley's best defense ever. Appreciate Ben and your support. I'm not a Lincoln Riley historian. It's got to be the short conversation, right? And by the way, we've talked about it. We just talked about it a minute ago. All you need is competent defense. You don't need a top 10 defense nationally. You just need a good enough defense and you will be fine. Lincoln Riley's going to figure out the quarterback position. I mean, the crazy thing about Lincoln Riley, think about this. Since he became a head coach, all his quarterbacks except Spencer Rattler have become either Heisman finalists or Heisman winners. Baker Mayfield, Heisman winner. Kyler Murray, Heisman winner. Jalen Hurts, Heisman finalist. Spencer Rattler didn't go good, although here's my hot take, and we might have some people from Louisiana listening right now. I think Spencer Rattler is going to end up being the New Orleans Saints starting quarterback before the end of this year. He was awesome in the preseason, but Caleb Williams also a Heisman finalist. Not saying Miller Moss gets there, but again, the quarterback is always going to get figured out under Lincoln Riley. You just need to not be completely incompetent and completely terrible on defense. And so to Ben's point, this is probably the best defense, but you don't have to be great. You just got to be good enough. What other questions do we got here? Do you put Kelly on the hot seat? Third straight opening loss, Paul asks. Great question. Brian Kelly so look, there's a difference between my opinion and an LSU fan's opinion. I don't think Brian Kelly's on the hot seat, but if you listen to our interview with Trey Wallace the other day, we talked a lot about this. It's really interesting because you look at LSU, and I said this with Trey. I said, you look at most programs in the SEC, you can kind of describe them in a sentence. Bama, excited about the DeBoer era. Florida, can't stand Billy Napier. Georgia, national championship or bust. You can describe every program in this league in essentially one sentence. Tennessee, we like our team now. The future is incredible. LSU, you can't do that because on the one hand, back-to-back 10-win seasons. On the other hand, 10-win seasons aren't good enough if you're not in the title chase, and they really haven't been. On the positive, you have the reigning Heisman Trophy winner. On the negative, your defense has been terrible. On the positive, you beat Bama to like there's just, I don't know what LSU fans think of your program right now. But I think more important than anything is that this was a scenario where, listen, we talked about it on the show all week. I really thought this was a game that Brian Kelly pseudo had to win simply because of the fact that, like, it just feels like he needs some positive momentum going into the heart of the season. When you lose week 1, we know how college football fans work. People freak out. People are mad. Even in a 12-team playoff era, doesn't change the fact that fans want to win. They want to win now. And when they lose, people are going to be mad. And so Brian Kelly kind of needed this win. He doesn't get it. I don't think he's on the hot seat. He's owed too much money. Scott Woodward, the AD at LSU, remember, this was his choice as the head coach. And so I think he's going to give him plenty of time. By the way, I think LSU will bounce back nicely. As I said, they're going to be at 4-1 going into the Ole Miss game in early October. So you get there, you beat Ole Miss, all of a sudden everybody forgets about this. Don't think he's on the hot seat, especially, again, they have the number 3 recruiting class in America right now. Only Alabama and Ohio State are ranked ahead of them. Any other questions, Producer Matt, before we get out of here? Good crowd on a Sunday night, by the way. LSU just gave Lincoln Riley his signature win. Good job, said Max. I mean, you're probably right. I mean, Lincoln Riley did win 11 games his first year. I mean, I'm trying to figure out who was the best win that first season. I'm trying to remember off the top of my head. Let me pull up the schedule. I guess, now that I'm looking at it, there weren't very many signature wins because the conference stunk. I guess he beat Notre Dame. I guess he beat UCLA. Both teams were ranked at the time. Max, you might be onto something. I didn't realize that Lincoln Riley basically had no real notable wins to speak of. Holiday Bowl wins don't count when you're SC. But listen, I'll say this. I think Lincoln Riley needed this. I think Lincoln Riley really needed 2 things. He needed to prove that he could put together a defense. You ask anybody who knows college football, it's not just that the defense was terrible. It was the way they didn't practice tackling. Like it wasn't a defensive tough culture at all. And so for USC to change who they are over the course of an offseason, I think that's a big thing for USC and Lincoln Riley. To me, it also speaks to guy still knows how to call offense, still knows how to put his team in position to score points, leaned on the defense in this game. But credit to him, man. This was a win that he absolutely needed, and he got it. Any other questions before we get out of here? It's kind of supposed to be a quicker live stream, but Torres, he talks a lot. Thoughts on the UK game, Vandegrift? Ben, appreciate your support. We talked about it a little bit on the early live stream. I thought he looked good. It's hard to know because we're in a lightning delay or a rain delay or whatever it was. Then you come back and the game gets canceled in the third quarter. But thing with Kentucky is 2 things. One, wasn't sold only because I bought too much in Devin Leary a year ago. And so that's on me because I was one of the people leading the Devin Leary as one of the most underrated portal additions of the offseason charge, okay? So because of that, it was hard for me to get too excited about Brock Vandegrift, but he obviously looked really good. And then the other thing is Mark Stoops going to let him loose? Mark Stoops goes through all these coordinators and everybody blames the coordinator every offseason. Remember, the offensive coordinator takes the cues from the head coach. And so the fact that you've basically had, 3 different offensive coordinators in 3 years, you go from Liam Cohen, then you bring in Scagnarello, then Scagnarello gets fired. You bring back Liam Cohen, then he leaves again. So I guess this is the 5th offensive coordinator in 5 years, if my math is correct. Is Mark Stoops going to open it up? I think we're going to find out pretty quick. Obviously, we know what Kentucky's schedule looks like. Kentucky, of course, this weekend will host South Carolina. Then, of course, the big one, as what we presume to be the number 1 team in the country, the Georgia Bulldogs will come to town in week 3. So 2 Saturdays from now. Again, if Georgia's the number 1 team in the country, then we're talking about one of the biggest upsets ever, because I believe Georgia plays Ball State next week or somebody like that. Tennessee Tech, by the way, is the team that they play. Any other questions before we get out of here? Best week 1 win, worst week 1 loss. Let me think about this. Best week 1 win. Best week 1 win. Whew. Miami. It's got to be Miami. I mean, listen, because it's not just that you beat Florida. By the way, the Miami win is big, not just because you beat Florida. That's big in recruiting, because there are so many kids in that state that are considering both, that are maybe committed to Florida, that were thinking about Miami. You beat the brakes off of somebody on your home field like that, that's about as big as it gets. I think USC is right up there, just for all the reasons that we talked about. Lincoln Riley, from a confidence perspective, from the fact of he just needed some positive vibes and some positive mojo. I think that's up there. Worst week 1 loss, there's no doubt about it. It is Florida. If you are listening live, we did full reaction to open the full show. We did a full show at about 1 o'clock Eastern time. You can go back and check that out. It will also be available on podcast tomorrow. Florida's debacle with Billy Napier. Don't think it's getting better. He has some things working in his favor in terms of not totally sure who would even fire him. The AD isn't going to fire him. There's an interim president. Dude's got to win some games, though, and it ain't going to get easier. Texas A&M coming to town 2 weeks from now. Any other questions before we get out of here? All right. Tell you what. Think that's it for this episode of the Aaron Torres Sports Podcast. A little live reaction here after the LSU game, after the USC game. USC wins a thriller. I think we're going to get out of here. If you're not subscribed to the Aaron Torres Pod, please make sure to do so. Apple, Spotify, Amazon Music, Google Music, wherever you listen to podcasts, make sure that you are, in fact, subscribed. Also, make sure you subscribe to the YouTube page. I said it a minute ago, but we crossed, 43,000 subscribers, and I cannot wait to see where this thing goes over the course of the next couple months. I think we're going to blow up. You are on the ground level, and I appreciate everybody's support. Make sure that you are subscribed on YouTube so you get notifications. Make sure you put on the notifications so you know when we're going live. That's all for today's show. I think I'll probably be back on, I guess it would be Tuesday night. No show Monday that I'm aware of, unless like Nick Saban comes out of retirement or something. I don't know. But I will be back on Tuesday night. We'll start looking at week 2. Some very interesting games in week 2. Colorado at Nebraska. Who else? We got Texas at Michigan, which I think is a very intriguing one. Oregon hosting Boise. All of a sudden doesn't look like a gimme. I will be back on Tuesday night. Enjoy the holiday weekend. Appreciate everybody who tuned in at midnight Eastern on a Sunday of a holiday weekend. This is the